So in this video we're going to take a look at how to create atmosphere and lighting in our scene, or in our painting. So here I've got just the collapsed layers of the character, and on top I've got this atmosphere group, and at the bottom I have this background group. So if I turn off atmosphere and I turn off the figure, you can see this is my background, and if I open the group, it's just an adjustment layer for levels. It gives me the lighting falling off from light to dark. A bit of a backlight layer, which just gives me this backlight around the figure here. If I turn the figure back on, you can see this just creates this backlight and helps bring him out from the background. The fog layer, and then just the gray shaded background. And then if we look at our atmosphere, we have a warm light gradient and a cool light gradient. You can see that's coming from the lower right hand corner. This is coming from the upper right left hand corner. And then cloud layer, and then again levels for lighting. So I'll turn these off and I'll show you how we create them from scratch. So I'll start with the background. I'm going to create a new layer and call it background, or BG, and I'll move that down to the very bottom. I'll select about a 50% gray, Control A to select all, and then Alt Delete just to fill the background with that layer color. I will go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels, click OK. That adds an adjustment layer on top of that grayscale, and I'll just dial the output down, not all the way to black, but pretty close. I'm going to select my mask here now, because this adjustment layer comes with a mask. Make sure that's selected. I'll select the Gradient tool, go to my Gradient control, and make sure it's foreground to background, black to white. Click OK, and now while I'm in that mask layer, I'm just going to draw a gradient. And basically that's going to allow me to mask out the effect of this levels control, so it's going from dark to light. And this allows me to come back here at any point and adjust the settings, so I'm not locked into one background. I can actually adjust those values at any point later on in the process because they're modular, they're broken apart. Now I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this layer Fog. And I'll just go to Filter, Render, Clouds, and it renders this set of clouds here, but unfortunately I didn't select black and white as my colors, so I'll select black and white as my colors, and then I'll run the filter again. Now I find the frequency of the clouds is far too strong, so I'm going to Control T to transform that layer and then scale them up, and I'll move them under my levels. And then I'll dial back the opacity just a bit, and that just gives me this nice atmospheric haze, which I find really, really nice. Now if I want to create the backlight, I just create a new layer. I'll name this backlight. Now this layer needs to be set to linear dodge add. That's what gives it the glowing quality. Select a brush, soft brush, turn up the diameter on it. And then here I'm just going to select a light color. Let's select a light reddish color. And then I'm just going to paint this around the figure in the back here. And I can go to my eraser and I can erase it out. I can go to the filter, blur, Gaussian blur. I can blur it. And now what I want to do is I want to hue shift it, so I'll go to Control U for my hue saturation, turn on colorize, and let's turn the saturation all the way up. Turn the lightness up, and just adjust our hues here. Turn the saturation down a bit. And I can jump the layer up, duplicate it, and it just adds one more instance of the layer, so it kind of doubles the effect. And it gives me a nice background glow. And I can always dial back the opacity of this as well. And I can adjust whether or not it's sitting above or below the layers control. If it's above the layers control, you're going to really need to dial back the opacity of it. The levels control is going to really knock it back. It's almost like a halo of light around the character, and I find it's really, really nice for carving it out of the background. So I will Shift select all these and Control G to group them together and just name this BG, or background. Now I'm going to create my atmosphere, so I'll create a new layer and call this Warm Light. Make sure this is at the top of the stack. I'm going to go back to my gradient control, and I will set this now to foreground to transparent, so that'll give me a gradient from the foreground color right here to a transparent color. And I tend to select kind of a warm orangey color for my warm light, and then I'll just click and drag, and that just draws me a nice warm light gradient, and I will set that to now overlay and then dial back the opacity. Now I'll create a new layer and call this Cool Light. And we'll repeat the process, bringing a cool light up from down here, set it to overlay, and then dial back the opacity. Now I'm going to put another layer in levels control. Go to Layer, Adjustment Layer, Levels, click OK. Crunch this down towards black again. This is going to be my lighting. I want a dramatic lighting from here. So I'm going to select my mask layer with the gradient tool, make sure it's set to foreground to background, make sure I'm set to black and white, and then click and drag, and this will be my lighting. There we go. It gives me a nice dramatic lighting there. And if I want, I can always get real specific and go in with the brush, and I can start painting in color where I want to punch up the detail. There we go. Now I will select these, group them together, and call this atmosphere. So there's our atmosphere and our background. So that's how you can very quickly add sort of a sense of space to the character. I'll create another layer here, and then I will just repeat that filter of the clouds. Go to Filter, oops, that was Gaussian Blur. Go to Filter, Render, Clouds. Oops, make sure I've got black and white selected. And go to Filter, Render, Clouds. And there we go, we've got a nice cloud layer. I will Control T to transform and then scale this up. And I typically leave this on a normal blending mode, but I just dial back the opacity, and then I just use an eraser, and I'll just use a nice sort of chunky ragged brush as my eraser, and I will erase out the clouds in the areas that I want to draw the eye to. See, I'm just erasing these clouds out in the areas that I find important, and then I can take the blur brush and I can manually blur the clouds, or I can Gaussian blur just to soften those edges. I want to fix this edge of the clouds right here. Oops, made a mistake there. Let's undo that. There we go. The trick to this is making sure that you've got a very, very soft edge to the brush, and your opacity is not set too high. You just want to gently knock this back, so I'll have to go over the face multiple times to erase all the clouds out from in front of it, because I don't want a really hard line of demarcation where the erasing takes place. There we go. And I'll typically move this down under all the colored lights so it catches that atmospheric hue. There we go. So there is our atmosphere and our background.